The crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom cast dancing shadows across the marble floors as Vivian Blackwell, our mayor's wife, decided to remind me exactly where I stood in her carefully orchestrated social hierarchy. "Know your place," she'd hissed, her diamond necklace catching the light as she pushed past me toward the VIP section of her annual charity gala. The security guard, a young man who clearly knew which side his bread was buttered on, immediately stepped forward to escort me toward the exit. I was wearing a simple black cocktail dress that Vivian had already loudly criticized as discount rack chic to her cluster of society friends. They'd all tittered appropriately while examining my off-the-rack shoes and costume jewelry with barely concealed disdain. "Some people," Vivian announced to her audience, "simply don't understand the difference between charity work and charity case." The ballroom erupted in polite laughter while I stood there, apparently guilty of the crime of attending a public charity event while not meeting Vivian Blackwell's standards for social acceptability. I smiled politely and stepped aside as the security guard approached. "Of course. I understand completely." Then I pulled out my phone and made one call. "Hello, James? It's Isabel. I need you to implement immediate closure procedures for the Grand Metropolitan Building. Code violations." I paused, watching Vivian hold court near the auction items. "Yes, right now. Clear the building in 30 minutes. The security guard had paused, clearly confused by my calm demeanor and professional phone conversation. "Is there a problem, he asked hesitantly. I smiled and handed him my business card. "Not for me, no." He read the card and his face went pale. You're Isabel Martinez, owner of Martinez Properties." "I am indeed. And this is my building." I looked around the opulent ballroom that Vivian Blackwell had been using for her social events for the past 5 years. "Which means I can close it whenever I determine there are safety violations." The security guard's hand was shaking as he handed back my card. "I had no idea. Mrs. Blackwell said you were." Mrs. Blackwell said a lot of things. Most of them incorrect. I checked my watch. "You might want to start moving people toward the exits. My property manager will be here in 20 minutes to handle the evacuation." Word traveled fast in a room full of gossiping socialites. Within 10 minutes, I could see confused whispers spreading through the crowd as people started receiving phone calls and checking their devices. Vivian Blackwell was in the middle of introducing the evening's keynote speaker when my property manager, James Rodriguez, walked through the main doors with 2 city inspectors and a clipboard. "Ladies and gentlemen," James announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet ballroom, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but this building needs to be evacuated immediately due to critical safety violations." The room erupted in chaos. Vivian's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of rage spreading across her face as she marched over to James. "This is absolutely unacceptable. Do you know who I am?" "Yes, You're the event organizer who failed to obtain proper permits for this gathering." James consulted his clipboard. "This event exceeds the building's occupancy limits, lacks required safety personnel, and violates several fire code regulations." "That's impossible. We've held this gala here for 5 years. Under the previous building ownership, yes. But the current owner has stricter standards for event compliance." James looked around the room with professional calm. "Everyone needs to exit the building within 15 minutes. Vivian spotted me near the entrance and her eyes narrowed dangerously. This is your doing somehow, isn't it?" I walked over to where she stood fuming in her $5,000 designer gown. "I'm not sure what you mean, Vivian. Don't play innocent with me. I don't know who you think you are, but you cannot just waltz in here and—" "Actually," I interrupted gently, "I can. Since I own the building." The color drained from her face. "What did you say?" "I said I own this building. Martinez Properties purchased it 18 months ago, along with the hotel next door and the parking structure across the street." I pulled out my phone and showed her the property management app. "Would you like to see the deed?" Vivian stared at the screen like it might bite her. But you're nobody. You don't even dress properly for these events." "I dress appropriately for my actual job, which is running a $200 million real estate portfolio." I gestured around the ballroom. "This building generates about $50,000 per month in event rental income. Your gala, by the way, was booked at a significantly discounted rate because the previous management company thought you were doing important charity work. The remaining guests were filing out of the ballroom, many of them stealing glances at our conversation. Vivian's carefully curated social event was dissolving into chaos, and she clearly had no idea how to handle it. "You can't just shut down a charity event," she sputtered. "The mayor will hear about this. Your husband already knows. I called him 20 minutes ago to explain the situation." I checked my phone. He seemed very interested to learn that his wife has been operating unpermitted events for 5 years. Apparently, there's an election coming up and he's concerned about bad publicity. Vivian's face went through several interesting color changes. Richard knew about this. Richard was very apologetic about the permit violations. He's also concerned about the liability issues if someone had been injured at an improperly managed event. I smiled pleasantly. He suggested you might want to find a new venue for future galas. James approached us with his clipboard. We need to finish the evacuation. The fire marshal is waiting outside." As the last guests filed out, I could hear fragments of conversations. "Owns the whole building. Martina's properties, that's worth millions." Vivian had no idea who she was talking to. Vivian stood in the middle of her ruined gala, surrounded by abandoned auction items and half-eaten dinner plates. "This isn't over," she said weakly. "Actually, it is." I handed her a business card. "This is my events coordinator. If you'd like to book the ballroom for future events, you'll need to go through proper channels. Permits, insurance, security deposits, the usual requirements for legitimate organizations. Security deposits. $25,000 for events of this size. Plus permit fees, insurance requirements, and full payment in advance." I looked around the empty ballroom. "Of course, you'll also need to find sponsors, since I imagine tonight's disaster might affect your fundraising relationships." Vivian's voice was barely a whisper. "You've destroyed everything. I've enforced basic safety regulations. Your event was overcrowded, undersecured, and improperly permitted. If there had been an emergency tonight, people could have been seriously injured." I gathered my purse and coat. "That's not charity work, Vivian. That's negligence." As we walked toward the exit, Vivian grabbed my arm. "Why? Why would you do this to me?" I stopped and looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time all evening, she wasn't posturing or performing. She just looked confused and hurt. "Because you told me to know my place," I said quietly. "And my place, as it turns out, is owning the building where you've been hosting your little social theater for 5 years. But I didn't know." "You didn't know because you never asked. You saw someone who didn't fit your image of what wealth and success should look like, and you decided I didn't belong." I adjusted my discount rack coat. "The problem with that approach, Vivian, is that you never actually know who you're talking to." We reached the lobby where the last guests were filing out into the night. Many of them were still talking about what had just happened, and I could see Vivian's social standing crumbling in real time. "What am I supposed to do now?" she asked. "You could try actually learning about charity work instead of just using it for social networking." I handed her another card. "This is for the Downtown Community Center. They do real charity work with real impact. They're always looking for volunteers who want to help rather than be seen helping." Vivian stared at the card. "You want me to volunteer at a community center? I want you to understand the difference between charity and performance. Between helping people and helping yourself to social status." I pushed open the lobby doors. "Maybe once you figure that out, you'll understand why your husband was so embarrassed by tonight's permit violations." As I walked out into the cool evening air, I could hear Vivian behind me, finally alone in the lobby of the building she'd never realized I owned. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Building secured. No injuries during evacuation. Fire marshal satisfied with compliance." I smiled and typed back, "Good. Draft new event policies requiring full permit documentation before any bookings. And Vivian Blackwell goes on the high-risk client list." The truth was, I hadn't bought the Grand Metropolitan building to spite anyone. I'd bought it because it was a good investment in a prime downtown location. But I had implemented the strict safety policies after watching too many society events prioritize appearances over actual safety. Tonight's evacuation wasn't revenge, it was accountability. Vivian Blackwell had spent years coasting on her husband's position while treating anyone she deemed beneath her as invisible. She'd learned, rather dramatically, that invisible doesn't mean powerless. As I walked to my car, I thought about all the other charity events I'd attended where real community workers were dismissed while social climbers like Vivian took credit for other people's hard work. Maybe tonight would inspire some actual change. My phone rang as I reached my car. Hello. Isabel? This is Mayor Blackwell. I wanted to personally apologize for what happened tonight. Vivian had no idea she was speaking to the building owner, and certainly no right to treat you that way regardless. Thank you, Mayor. I hope this incident helps everyone understand the importance of proper event management. Absolutely. And I wanted to ask, would Martinez Properties be interested in hosting the city's homeless services fundraiser next month? We need a venue that takes safety and community impact seriously. I smiled, thinking about how the evening had transformed from social humiliation to business opportunity. I'd be very interested in discussing that. My events coordinator will call your office tomorrow. As I drove home through the city I'd been quietly investing in for years, I reflected on how satisfying it had been to show Vivian Blackwell exactly where my place was, at the top of the property ladder she'd been trying to climb her entire adult life. Sometimes the best way to handle being told you don't belong is to prove that you own the place where they think you don't belong. And sometimes the most elegant response to know your place is to demonstrate that your place is exactly where you've always been, just higher up the ladder than anyone realized.